The book is still in your hand, but the mind has already left the room. A retired professor stands in a Harvard-style library at golden hour, watching dust move through a beam of light. The shelves are quiet. The leather chairs are quiet. The smell of old paper rises with the weight of years, lectures, names, honors, failures, and students who may no longer remember. Nothing has happened. Dust has crossed sunlight. A page has aged. A room has grown dim. But the first impression says something else. It says, you are becoming one of these books. Placed here. Useful once. Opened less and less. Remembered by fewer people each year. And pain begins, not from the dust, not from the library, not from time itself, but from agreement. The event appears. The mind adds a judgment. Then the soul signs its name beneath it. Epictetus would not ask whether aging hurts. He would ask whether you have handed your ruling faculty to an appearance before examining it. The dust is not your master. The book is not your verdict. The question is whether you assent. Before the professor can answer the impression, he must draw the line. This is the first discipline. Not comfort. Not explanation. Not the search for a kinder feeling. The line. The dust in the sunlight is not his. The late hour is not his. The smell of old paper and leather is not his, except as something received by the senses. The age of the room is not his. The fact that students graduate, move away, forget names, misquote lectures, and build lives without looking back is not his. The reputation that remains after a career is not his. The timing of decline is not his. The shelf on which a book sits unopened is not his. Whether another person remembers him with gratitude, indifference, irritation, or not at all is not his. But the judgment he makes about these things is his. That is where Epictetus begins. Not with the world behaving properly. Not with time showing respect. Not with other minds arranging themselves around your need to be seen. He begins with the ruling faculty, the part that can look at an impression and say, you are only an appearance. Let me examine you. The professor feels the pull. He has stood in rooms like this for decades. He has turned pages with care. He has corrected sentences. He has watched young faces try to hide boredom, ambition, confusion, admiration. He has seen his own name printed on a spine. He has heard applause after a lecture and silence after a retirement dinner. He knows how quickly a full calendar becomes an empty one. Now the light falls across the dust, and the mind tries to convert a small visible thing into a sentence about his worth. This is the danger. Not that the dust exists. Not that memory fades. Not that age changes the body and rearranges the day. The danger is that the mind takes what is outside its command and makes it the judge of what is inside its command. If they remember me, I mattered. If they forget me, I failed. If my books are read, I was useful. If my name disappears, I am diminished. Every one of those sentences gives authority to something unstable. Other minds. Public attention. Academic reputation. The habits of younger generations. The market for old books. The weakness of memory. The accident of who enters the library and who passes by. These are not wicked things. They are merely not yours to govern. And when a person confuses what is not his with what is his, he becomes a servant without noticing the chain. A servant to praise. A servant to silence. A servant to being cited, invited, mentioned, thanked, preserved. He may still look dignified from the outside. He may stand with a straight back, one hand on a hardcover book, the other resting near the edge of the table. But inside, he has placed his peace in the hands of people who are not present, in years that cannot answer, in rooms that will eventually be cleaned, renovated, renamed, or emptied. Epictetus would call this a misplacement of priority. You are protecting the wrong thing. You are trying to protect the image of being remembered instead of protecting the faculty that can meet being forgotten without surrender. You are trying to guard your name in the minds of others instead of guarding your assent in your own mind. You are treating reputation as if it were the citadel, when the citadel is the power to choose your judgment. This does not make memory worthless. It does not mean a professor should despise his work, his students, his books, or the long labor of thought. A Stoic does not sneer at human things to prove strength. He simply refuses to make externals sovereign. The hardcover book may matter as an object of duty. It may represent study, discipline, care, inheritance, conversation across generations. Pick it up well. Preserve it if that is your task. Read it carefully if that is your hour. Teach from it if students are before you. Return it to the shelf if the room must close. But do not ask the book to certify your worth. Do not ask dust in a sunbeam to tell you whether your life was enough. Do not ask the smell of leather and paper to decide the rank of your soul. The boundary is plain, but not easy. Yours are judgment, assent, intention, attention, and the next response. Not yours are outcome, timing, other minds, reputation, weather, past events, or whether this moment obeys your preference. The professor cannot command remembrance. He can command whether he treats remembrance as master. He cannot order the future to keep his name warm. He can order his present mind not to trade its freedom for that demand. So he stands there, and the first governable action is small. He notices the impression. He does not bow to it. He lets the dust move without turning it into a verdict. He returns his attention to the hardcover book, to the weight of it in his hand, to the page before him, to the duty still available in this hour. Maybe that duty is reading one more paragraph with care. Maybe it is writing a note without vanity. Maybe it is placing the book back where another reader may find it. Maybe it is leaving the room without resentment. The act does not need to be grand. It needs to be governed. That is the difference between a man carried by appearances and a man trained by philosophy. One sees the dust and becomes the accused. The other sees the dust and examines the court. Who gave this moment authority? Who appointed fading memory as judge? Who decided that being forgotten is proof of being less? If the answer is I did, then the remedy begins where the error began. Inside assent, the professor's error is not that he sees dust in the light. That is only the event. A beam of golden hour crosses the library. Dust moves through it. The air carries the smell of old paper and leather. A hardcover book rests in his hand. Somewhere beyond the shelves, the building continues its ordinary work. Doors open. Shoes strike stone. A distant voice drops into silence. Nothing in this scene has spoken a command. Then comes the impression. The impression says, "This is about you." It does not arrive politely. It does not present evidence in order. It presses. It takes the smell of aging paper, the quiet of the room, the fading light, and it makes them appear urgent and personal. It says the dust is not dust. It is a sign. It says the book is not a book. It is a warning. It says the silence is not silence. It is neglect. That is how appearances work when the mind is untrained. They arrive with costume and force. They seem to carry authority because they come quickly. They feel true because they come with sensation. The smell of leather, the dimming hour, the stillness of the shelves, these things strike the senses, and the mind rushes to give them meaning. But Epictetus separates what most people fuse together. First, there is the event. Second, there is the impression. Third, there is the judgment. Fourth, there is assent. The event is simple, dust moves in sunlight. The impression is stronger, this moment appears to reveal your disappearance. The judgment is more dangerous, being forgotten would make you less. Assent is the final act, you accept that judgment is true and begin to live from it. Pain enters deeply at that fourth point. Not because the world forced its way into the ruling faculty, but because the ruling faculty opened the gate. This is not denial of hardship. A professor who has spent his life teaching may reasonably notice the ache of no longer being needed in the same way. A person may feel the cost of age, retirement, lost influence, or changing rooms. Stoicism does not require a man to pretend the library is cheerful when it is solemn. It requires him to speak accurately about what is happening inside his own mind. There is pain, and then there is agreement with pain's interpretation. There is an ache, and then there is the sentence, "This ache proves I have been erased." There is loneliness, and then there is the sentence, "Loneliness proves I no longer have worth." There is fading reputation, and then there is the sentence, "If fewer people speak my name, my life has been reduced." These sentences are not events. They are judgments. They are not imposed by dust, books, silence, age, or other people's memory. They are added. And whatever is added can be examined. The professor must not argue with the dust. He must not argue with the room. He must not argue with the fact that generations move on. He must turn toward the place where the mistake is being manufactured. He can say, "An impression has appeared." That alone is a disciplined sentence. It creates distance without escape. It does not say, "Nothing is wrong." It says, "Something appears to me as wrong, and I will not yet agree." This pause is not weakness. It is command. The untrained mind thinks speed is strength. It thinks the first reaction is the honest one. It believes that to feel something sharply is to have discovered truth. But the first movement of the mind is often only habit wearing the mask of certainty. Epictetus trains the student not to despise impressions, but to stop kneeling before them. The professor's assent trap is clear. He lets the fear of being forgotten decide the next word, the next pause, the next movement, the next refusal. He may close the book with resentment. He may look at the shelves as enemies. He may turn inward and rehearse old honors as evidence for the defense. He may become bitter toward younger people who are not guilty of his judgment. He may speak sharply to the librarian. He may leave the room as if the room has insulted him. But none of that began with the dust. It began when he agreed too quickly. This is why the difference between pain and agreement matters. Pain may knock. Agreement hands at the chair, the desk, the pen, and the authority to write law. A trained person does not need the impression to disappear before acting well. He only needs to stop granting it rule. He can feel the pressure and still refuse the false conclusion. He can smell the old paper and still say, this scent is not a verdict. He can watch the dust and still say, motion in light does not measure a man's worth. He can hold the hardcover book and still say, my task is not to be worshipped by future readers. My task is to govern the judgment available now. The moment becomes clear when stripped of exaggeration. A man is in a library. A book is in his hand. An impression has appeared. A judgment is requesting assent. That is all. And because that is all, freedom has not been lost. Now the training must happen inside the room, not later, not in a cleaner moment, not after the mind is already surrendered and then wants philosophy to repair the damage. Ascesis is practice under pressure. For the retired professor, the pressure is quiet. No one is shouting. No one has accused him. There is no public humiliation, no argument across a table, no visible enemy. The challenge is more precise than that. He is alone with an appearance, and the appearance is trying to become law. That is enough for practice. He stands in the Harvard-style library at golden hour. He feels the hardcover book against his palm. He smells old paper and leather. He watches dust move through the light. The mind says, you are fading. You are being shelved. You are becoming a thing people pass without opening. The first exercise is to stop adding. Not stop feeling. Not stop noticing. Stop adding. Dust in light. Book in hand. Old paper in the air. Fear appearing. That is the inventory. Nothing more is permitted without examination. A man trained by Epictetus does not let the imagination keep decorating the event until it becomes unbearable. He does not allow a beam of light to become a funeral speech. He does not allow a quiet library to become a courtroom. He does not allow the smell of leather to become evidence that his life has been dismissed. He names the impression. This appears to me as being forgotten. That sentence matters because it restores order. It does not say, I am forgotten. It says, this appears to me as being forgotten. The difference is the difference between slavery and command. One sentence kneels before the appearance. The other holds it at arm's length and requires it to answer. Then he asks the strict question, what part of this is mine? Not, how do I make this feeling leave? Not, how do I prove I still matter? Not, who should have remembered me better? Those questions scatter the mind into externals. They send attention into other people's memories, old classrooms, former praise, unanswered letters, shrinking invitations, the changing value of one's work in public eyes. None of that is available for command. The available field is smaller and stronger. Judgment. Assent. Intention. Attention. Next response. So the professor practices with the object nearest to him. The hardcover book becomes the anchor. He does not use it as a symbol of lost importance. He uses it as a return point for attention. His fingers notice the cover. His thumb rests near the edge of the page. The weight is real. The imagined verdict is not. He may quietly say, this book is here. My judgment is here. My next act is here. That is not poetry. It is discipline. The mind may try again. It may say, but your name will vanish. Let it appear. The exercise is not to prevent the impression from returning. The exercise is to refuse its authority each time it returns without proof. He answers, whether my name remains in other minds is not mine. Whether I act with care in this moment is mine. The mind says, your work may be unread. He answers, whether it is read is not mine. Whether I handled the work with integrity when it was before me was mine. Whether I handle this book with attention now is mine. The mind says, the room will outlast you. He answers, then let the room outlast me. My task is not to defeat time. My task is not to give time command over my judgment. This is slow pressure. The correction must be repeated because the false judgment has been repeated for years in different costumes. It appeared after retirement. It appeared when an email went unanswered. It appeared when a younger scholar spoke as if the professor's generation were merely background. It appeared when a former student walked past without recognition. It appears now through dust and light. Different events. Same false ruler. The value error is that the mind gives remembrance more authority than choice. It inflates being preserved in public memory above the ruling faculty itself. It treats reputation as if it were a moral possession, when it is only an external report held in unstable minds. Ascesis cuts that error down. The professor does not need to insult reputation. He only needs to put it back outside the wall. He does not need to despise being remembered. He only needs to stop buying peace with remembrance as the price. If someone remembers him with gratitude, that is pleasant. If someone forgets him entirely, that is possible. Neither condition has the right to govern his assent. So he performs the next governable action. He opens the hardcover book again. He reads one sentence without using it to measure himself. He allows the smell of old paper and leather to remain what it is, a scent, not a sentence. He watches the dust move and does not convert it into accusation. He stands in the fading light as a man still responsible for his own faculty. This is the work. Not dramatic. Not visible to a room full of admirers. No one applauds a man for refusing a false judgment in silence. But that is exactly why the practice is clean. There is no audience to reward the performance. There is only the ruling faculty and the impression before it. And if he can govern that, then the library has not buried him. It has trained him. A man who has separated the event from the judgment is not finished. He must now decide how to conduct himself. This is where many people misunderstand Stoicism. They think freedom from externals means withdrawal from duty. They think that if reputation is not yours, then your work no longer matters. If remembrance is not yours, then teaching no longer matters. If other minds are not yours, then your words, your care, your discipline, your obligations can be set down like an old coat. Epictetus does not give permission for neglect. He removes slavery so responsibility can become clean. The retired professor is not commanded to be remembered. But he is still responsible for how he handles the book in his hand. He is not commanded to control whether his former students speak his name. But he is still responsible for whether he thinks bitterly of them. He is not commanded to defeat age. But he is still responsible for whether age becomes an excuse for resentment, vanity, harsh speech, or self-pity. The boundary of control does not shrink the moral life. It sharpens it. When the professor stands in the library and feels the fear of being forgotten, he has several possible actions. He can close the hardcover book and walk away as if the room has betrayed him. He can begin rehearsing old grievances against the department, the students, the institution, the culture, the years. He can turn memory into a courtroom and appoint himself both victim and judge. He can take the quiet of the shelves as disrespect and let that false judgment poison the next person who speaks to him. Or he can return to duty. Duty begins with the next governable action. Not the grand account of a life. Not the final verdict of history. Not the question of whether his lectures mattered enough. The next action. His hand can turn the page carefully. His attention can read the sentence before him. His intention can become useful without demanding witness. His judgment can refuse to call neglect what is merely silence. His speech, if someone approaches, can be measured. If a young librarian asks whether he needs help, he does not answer from the wound of imagined disappearance. He does not make an innocent question carry the weight of decades. He says what the moment requires. No, thank you. Or, yes, I'm looking for the index volume. Or, could you place this back when you have time? That is conduct. It is small, but it is not trivial. A person reveals his philosophy not in the speech he gives about wisdom, but in the tone he uses when the mind feels diminished. The professor's duty is not to be impressive. It is to be just. Just toward the room, which has done him no harm. Just toward the younger people, who are not guilty of living after him. Just toward the books, which are not monuments to his importance but objects to be handled with care. Just toward his past work, which should neither be worshipped nor despised. Just toward his own ruling faculty, which should not be sold to the demand for remembrance. This is the consequence of continuing the false judgment. If he believes being forgotten reduces him, he will begin to treat others as instruments of his preservation. Their attention will become a payment. Their praise will become a debt. Their failure to remember will become an offense. He will no longer meet people as fellow rational beings. He will meet them as witnesses who owe testimony. That is how a respectable life becomes inwardly corrupt. Not through scandal. Not through public disgrace. through the quiet habit of requiring externals to prove what only character can show. A professor may spend years teaching students to read carefully, but if he cannot read his own impression carefully, he has missed the harder text. He may have trained others to distinguish evidence from assertion, but if he accepts the assertion "I am forgotten, therefore I am less," without examination, he has abandoned his own discipline at the point where it matters. Responsibility means he must apply the same rigor inward. What is the evidence? Dust in light. What is the addition? This means I am being erased. What is the judgment? Being erased by memory would diminish my worth. What is the correction? Worth is not stored in memory. It is shown in the use of the ruling faculty now. Once this is clear, his conduct can become simple again. He can finish the paragraph. He can make a note in the margin if the book belongs to him, or refrain if it does not. He can close it with care. He can return it to the table without drama. He can look once more at the dust moving in the golden hour and let it remain dust. He can leave the library without demanding that the room mourn his exit. There is dignity in that. Not the dignity of being honored. The dignity of not needing honor in order to act honorably. That is the difference between a man serving reputation and a man serving duty. The first asks every moment to confirm him. The second asks, "What is required of me here?" The first turns even silence into insult. The second turns even silence into practice. The first mistakes remembrance for justice. The second remembers that justice is his own work. So the professor's responsibility is not to force a legacy. It is to govern the faculty that wants legacy to become law. And in that governed act, he is still teaching. Even if no one sees it, freedom does not mean the professor escapes age, silence, or the possibility of being forgotten. Freedom means he no longer lets those things govern the judgment by which he lives. The dust will keep moving through the light. The leather will keep its old smell. The books will remain on the shelves, opened by some, ignored by others. His name may be remembered in one mind, misremembered in another, and absent from many more. None of that is under command. But he can still command the act nearest to him. He can hold the hardcover book without turning it into a verdict. He can feel the ache of impermanence without agreeing that it proves anything about his worth. He can let the library be quiet without calling the quiet an insult. He can leave behind work without demanding that the future serve as witness. This is the freedom Epictetus points toward, not a life protected from loss, but a ruling faculty not owned by loss. The professor does not need to win an argument with time. Time is not debating him. He does not need the room to promise remembrance. Rooms do not make moral judgments. He does not need dust, paper, students, institutions, or history to confirm what only his own choice can preserve. So he closes the book carefully. He places it where it belongs. He lets the golden hour pass. And he walks out as a man who has not confused pain with agreement. Return to what is yours to govern.